thank you all for coming. My name is Adam Sanchez. I'm going to be facilitating this panel. I'm a teacher here at Madison. This is the panel on transforming teachers' unions. So if you're in the wrong place, you can leave now or forever hold your peace. Hopefully you're not. This is an incredible time to be talking about this subject because I think we are facing, as teachers, an unprecedented assault on our profession, on public education in general, on our public schools. We have seen over the last year and the last couple of years entire public school systems privatized, like in Philadelphia. And so, I think there should be no question that the economic crisis has ushered in an unprecedented assault on teachers' unions, on teachers in public schools. But I think what is markedly different about this year and the past 2 years is that what was a one-sided fight for 35, maybe 40 years, has now become a two-sided fight. And I think what ushered that in was originally the occupation of the Capitol in Madison, Wisconsin, which was initiated and really led by a wildcat strike of teachers across Wisconsin, right? And then this year we had the historic victory of the Chicago Teachers Union, which we need to learn the lessons of. And spread, because they showed us how to fight, something that teachers' unions for a long time have not done. So I think what this panel really represents is a new kind of teachers' unionism, which is much needed now. A social justice unionism that is not just about fighting for wages and working conditions, but sees the teachers' union as a vehicle to fight back against austerity, broader austerity, and the plan by the 1% to lower the standard of living of the entire working class, that fights not just for narrow teacher interests, but fights for our communities, for our kids, and as the Chicago teachers did, says we want the kids that we educate, the 99% of students, to get everything that the 1% of students gets in their private schools, right? And that we are going to draw a line and strike if necessary to defend the further erosion of public education and to win that kind of education, what the children of Obama, of Rahm Emanuel, of Mitt Romney, what they get. We want that for all children. So I'm really pleased to facilitate this panel where we've got a really phenomenal panel, and only Bob Peterson sent me his one-line bio, so I get to make up the rest. So Bob Peterson, we'll start with him since he did his homework. Taught 5th grade for 30 years, is a founding editor of Rethinking Schools, started La Escuela Fratni, an innovative public two-way bilingual school, and is now president of the Milwaukee Teachers Education Association. So, and Emily Crum is a member of Social Equality Educators. She was a striking Reynolds teacher for their victorious strike last year. She helped run their organizing committee and teaches at Alder Elementary School. Jesse Agopian is also a member of Social Equality Educators in Seattle. He teaches at Garfield High School and is an amazing contributor to this book that has inspired me a lot, called Education and Capitalism. He has a phenomenal chapter on teachers' unions and social justice, which is a must-read. If you haven't checked out that book, please do. It's a really incredible chapter about the history of teachers' unions and how we transform them, how we can transform them today. Gwen Sullivan, as hopefully many of you know, the Portland Association of Teachers president. And I just have to say about Gwen, I'm used to union leadership being kind of more afraid of me as like a lefty radical in the union, and I have to say, to Gwen's phenomenal credit, she has facilitated more than any other union leader I've ever come in contact with, trying to organize and change the culture of this union, which at sometimes I think can be a very frustrating task. And I'm really proud to see her sitting on this panel and continuing to work on that project with us. So each of them. So each of them are going to get about 10 minutes to speak, and then we're going to do. Yes, and if you didn't hear earlier, I'm Adam Sanchez. I'm a teacher at Madison High School and a member of Social Equality Educators. So each of them are going to get about 10 minutes to speak, and then we're going to open it up for discussion, and I'll tell you how that works when we get there. So we'll start with one.
So I think this might surprise you, but being that I'm the president of the Teachers Union, first and foremost, it's pretty important for you to know that I am a teacher. That they like to separate, these are the teachers and these are the teachers union, that we are separate. And like I say, first and foremost, I am a teacher. That's where I feel like I do my best work. So in our particular union here in Portland, I'm going to start off by talking about where we were, where we need to go, and where we are now. And basically, for many years, since I've been a teacher, in '95 is when I started in the district, it was a very much a service-oriented style. And it worked out okay. When we had problems on the ground as teachers, we would call into the union, and the union staff would come out and they would help us. And it was very helpful at the time for that 1 year that I saw what I would consider a good quality education for our kids, where we had full-time music teachers, full-time art teachers, full-time PE teachers, full-time counselors. We didn't have class sizes over 25. And that was 1 year, and that's how it worked. And then after that, as the cuts really hit hard here, and I was one of the 200 teachers that was laid off because I was a first-year teacher, then things started to get a little more difficult for the union to handle. It started to, where you have more problems because you have less people on the ground doing the work, meaning educating the kids. So as more problems came up, we had to figure out how certain people were going to get service, and how certain things, how you would handle other situations. And so in that model, it just became a model that didn't work so well. We needed to do more organizing and more education of members to know what their rights are, and not just call in for help. And so over the next, 95, so over the next about, I'd say, 10, 15 years, what has changed is it hasn't gotten any better, it's only gotten worse. And so to the point that we can't handle everything, and I say we, us as educators and at the union office and union leadership, we can't handle everything that's happening at all. And so I guess where I see us going is empowering our members, empowering teachers to know, first of all, what are their rights and why are these rights important? That it's not just about them as teachers, and it's not just about your working environment. It's about the kids that you were teaching that look up to you and look up to the environment that you teach in. So it's about a respectful place in the first place. It's about empowering people like Adam to be able to have a lot of opinions, but not just have the opinions, but back it up with some facts that are meaningful, and to organize around that and get people involved. I know that myself as a person, I know that I have some pretty hardcore opinions, but I also know in my position that you can't get too far in front of people because you will be by yourself. So my job, I feel like, is to be able to bring people in and hear people's opinions and figure out how we can empower more and more people so we can have a collective voice about what we truly believe for our profession and for our children. It's a combination. What I can say is, personally, the Chicago Teachers Union gave me such huge inspiration. It took me to a point where I have been working and trying to fight off everything that's thrown at us. And I feel like for the first time that I can say, no, we need to stop fighting every single thing and regroup and think about what it is that we value. And let's put that together, like Chicago did. They did all the research to figure out that it's like a 70-page document about the Chicago schools that kids deserve. And to me, reading through that, it's right. It is about what is good and what is right. So if we do that sort of process within our own association, when things are thrown at us, you need to do this. You need to do more testing. You need to start documenting certain things. You need to use a data wall. You need to do all of these things. We can say, actually, if you look at what we believe for our kids and for our profession, that's not what we are going to do because we don't believe it, and neither do you. So I think that there's a proactive place that we can get to. We're not there because it takes work. And it's not just by me as a leader. It's by all of us. Getting to the point, I talked about where we were, where we need to be, and part of it is I feel like I'm trapped in purgatory, in an interesting place where I'm trying desperately to move people into empowering others, and also fighting off we've never done it that way. And I go back to having many different principals over the years that I've taught. And I remember principals that would come in, and their first year, they would come right in and they would try to change everything. And as teachers, and as parents, and as kids, you go, I don't like that principal. And every step, you battled with them. And then there's a principal that would come in that first year, and they would sit back. That first year, they would sit back and they would watch and see how things worked in your school. What did work and what didn't. And then they'd make relationships with people, and then bring people together to make the school work better if things weren't. And I think about myself in that position. I've been the president of the association for 1 year. I feel like I have my 1 year under my belt. And so I feel like now is the time where we can start to move a little bit further, where we take the things that are working and continue them, and take the things that aren't and change them, and bring those people that were involved in the things that aren't working and not close the door on them, but help them come and see where their place is and where their empowerment is. So I appreciate being here because I'm inspired, I'm frustrated, I'm sad at times, but more than anything, the thing that comes back to me is I know what's right. And I think all of you do too. So if we hold on to what we know is right, we will move this in the right direction. So, thank you.
Thank you. So if you were in the opening session, you heard Bob Peterson lament the decline of print media. And I agree with him, being in a town that lost a second newspaper that I often was able to sneak op-eds in. It's sad. But at the same time, I think Newsweek going down, you guys remember this? This one, fire bad teachers. I like to think this is the reason why Newsweek collapsed. Right? Adam is absolutely right that we're under an unprecedented attack. But, you know, just because Newsweek collapsed, I don't think that anti-teacher, you know, teacher bashing media has disappeared. How many people here went to Won't Back Down? Has anyone saw it? You're alone. You're alone because nobody went to go see it. You guys know that it broke the all-time record for lowest box office? I have the list here. It was worse than The Rocker, The Hoot, and Rumor Has It with Jennifer Aniston. Unbelievable. And they had this huge gala events for it, right? They had Rock for Teachers that was launching this thing. And yet, you know what happened was the Chicago teacher strike happened. And Won't Back Down came to be symbolized by teachers standing up for their profession, standing up for kids, and standing up for public education, not this corporate teacher bashing film. So I think I've been following the Chicago public schools for a long time. I guess ever since Arne Duncan began implementing the Renaissance 2010 program there, I've been paying attention. You know, this is a program that closed 100 schools in mostly black neighborhoods, and then turned a lot of them into privatized charters and military academies, the most militarized school district in the entire nation. And then, you know, Rahm Emanuel takes over in this era of the Great Recession, and he just takes the corporate reforms on to the next level, saying that class sizes of 50 is good, because it doesn't matter how many kids are in a classroom, right? What matters is the quality of the teacher. And so he just takes the corporate reform movement with even more pressing agenda because of the economic collapse and them wanting to take out this crisis on public sector workers rather than the banks that collapsed the global economy. And in their corporate movement there in Chicago, they actually got people to believe that rote memorization, and that they got people to believe that rote lessons and memorization and standardized testing and charter schools and military academies were the answer. And I think it's plainly not the case. They don't believe in these things. They say that standardized testing is, they say they are for standardized testing, but they aren't for it. They believe in teaching critical thinking skills to their own children. Okay? The principal of the elite private high school that Rahm Emanuel sends his kids to, did you guys read her report? She said that she opposes standardized testing as a way of measuring teaching and learning. So it's not for Rahm's kids, but apparently for your kids, filling in bubble tests is good enough, right? They have you believing that they don't believe in smaller class sizes, right? They don't believe in smaller class sizes for your kids. For Bill Gates, who leads this movement of it doesn't matter what size the class is, it's only the teacher, he went to an elite private high school that had 12 students in a class, Lakeside in Seattle, right? Where did his kids go to? No, they know what kids should have, but they don't believe in it for your kids. And then let me tell you something about the military academies. They have you believing that they believe that students should be all they can be and go off to war. You should know better. They don't believe in sending kids off to war in general. They believe in sending your kids off to war. They believe in sending their kids to Harvard, right?
Yep.
So I think that what we saw in Chicago was just a calling out of that simple fact, right? That they don't actually believe in the policies that they promote for the vast majority of kids, and that not only did they call it out and create that incredible what schools deserve pamphlet, but they actually backed it up with some action, which was incredible to see. Because in Seattle, I'm coming from a union where our president was interviewed over the summer, in the Seattle Times. Jonathan Knapp is the president of the Seattle Education Association, and the headline in the newspaper said, Seattle Teachers Union adopts softer strategy. I almost spilled the milk all over my lap that morning reading the newspaper. And you read the details and it gets worse. He says, simply saying no is no longer an option. The climate has changed and we have to be advocates for public education in a way that 20 years ago we didn't. And the way that we do that is building relationships, and this is great, and not by confronting people or saying it's our way or the highway. And then he goes on, the best quote is, he goes on to say, teachers have less power than ever before. Okay, so the narrative we're hearing in Seattle is that our unions are weaker than they've ever been, and so the best what we should do is focus on building relationships with the district, not confronting them when they push policies that are negative for teachers and for students. And what Chicago showed, I think, is something completely different, and it's what all union movements that have had a real powerful effect in transforming a labor struggle into a social movement. And what they were able to do was take a year and build community relationships and build a whole different model for what unionism can be. And it's a model that has deep roots in Chicago. In fact, the teachers' union movement started in Chicago in 1887. The Chicago Federation of Teachers was formed there. And one of the people that everyone should know about and should go out and study her is Margaret Haley. She was dubbed the Lady Labor Slugger. And this woman fused the women's suffrage movement with the union movement amongst teachers in an incredible chapter in labor history and social movements, right? She was able to help win the right to vote for women in Illinois by organizing teachers to support suffrage, and she was able to organize for more funding for the schools by getting the suffragettes behind the school movement. It's an amazing story that everybody should know and read about, and there's some about her in our book, Education and Capitalism. And it really should serve as our model today. What did they do in Chicago? When Arne Duncan went to close down those schools, CORE, right, the rank and file activists, the social justice teachers in the union, said, it's not just that we're against school closures, it's that we know this is racist, right? And we need to build an anti-racist struggle inside our union that says they're closing the black schools and worsening education for them, and fused community struggles with the union movement. Then this year during the strike, right before the strike, they're building relationships with the Occupy movement, going down, building relationships with other union movements, and strengthening the Occupy movement so that when they went on strike, they had networks of activists in the community that came to their aid. And this is a model of unionism that I think we need to get to. And it's going to be tough in a lot of our locals. I think with a union president that says we're weaker than we've ever been, right in a bargaining year, I mean, maybe it's true. I don't think it is. But even if it's true, do you really start bargaining by saying we're weak? I mean, maybe you say it, but you say it to your little clique. You don't say it to the Seattle Times. I'm sorry, and I'm not saying anything that I haven't said directly to him. I'm not talking behind his back, because this is really, I think, a question of will our labor unions be revived on a different model that can stand and fight. And to talk about what that model, how we're trying to get that, I'll end by just saying how we're trying to get that model in Seattle. And, you know, this past year, we saw that the state legislature has been cutting and cutting and cutting the budget. And a lower court ruled that these cuts were unconstitutional under our state constitution, because it says in Washington State that education is the paramount duty. So before they fund anything else in Washington State, they're supposed to fund the public schools. And so I saw that ruling, and we organized the C teachers to go down to the legislative session when they were getting ready to cut $2 billion from public education and health care. And we said, actually, we're not just opposed to this morally, we think that this is illegal under the highest law of Washington State. So we went and issued a citizen's arrest to the state legislature. Many of you were there with me that day, and it was incredible. All the Occupy activists were down there, the labor unions were down there, this big day of protest, but we got into the House Ways and Means Committee session where they actually do the voting to cut put the proposal forward to cut the money. And as soon as they gavelled in the session, we stood up, mic checked the room, reading the state constitution, talking about why this was illegal and how a court had ruled this as illegal. And then just the cherry on top, I took out the plastic handcuffs and said, you know, does any one of you legislators care to come with me in this illegal act? And the officer at the time didn't think it was as funny as you guys do, and he didn't agree with my interpretation of the law and arrested me instead. And I was nervous, like, you know, did this do anything? Okay, yeah, we were making a funny point, but was there anything to this? And I get back to school the next day, and my kids, Mr. Hagopian, we saw you, you got arrested, we're so glad you're out. We started a Facebook page called Free Mr. Hagopian, and I guess it worked. And then one of my students said, well, if you're out now, then I guess we'll change the Facebook page to Walk Out Against the Budget Cuts. And the very next day, in 24 hours of organizing, 600 students walked out of Garfield High School streaming by my classroom with signs they'd made, with a pamphlet that went through what the budget cuts meant to their school. And to see the student who launched that movement was a student I had in my classroom and used Bob Peterson's Rethinking Schools lessons, you know, and Bill Bigelow's Rethinking Schools lessons, where we reenact strikes and walkouts, and, you know, these type, to see them put that into practice in the school building and walk to the mayor's office and demand an audience with him and form a citywide organization where they're talking about what they're going to do if the legislature doesn't come up with $1 billion. It was the most inspiring day of my life, and it showed what our unions could be doing to interact and build solidarity with students and the community if the rank and file was in charge, right, and helping to run the union. So I think that's a model for where we want to push these unions. And I just want to end with a quote from Margaret Haley, who was so amazing at fusing the social struggles with unions. She said, "Two ideals are struggling for supremacy in American life today. One, the industrial ideal, dominating through the supremacy of commercialism, which subordinates the worker to the product and the machine. If the school, and the other, the ideal of democracy, the ideal of educators, which places humanity above the machines. If the school cannot bring joy to the work of the world, the joy must go out of its own life, and work in school, as in the factory, will become drudgery." And that's why we're fighting.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to stay seated just because I have a little more structure to what I'm going to say, because I'm completely honored to be on this panel with people that I admire so greatly. I mean, 2 union presidents, people that are super active, and I feel slightly unworthy to be here. So I had to really structure my thoughts. I am a teacher, and I grew up playing teacher, admiring my teachers, and loving the process of learning. I always knew I wanted to teach. This is my 6th year teaching kindergarten. I have taught native language Spanish kindergarten. I've taught sheltered English. I've taught a hybrid class of both languages in 1 year. I have taught half-day kindergarten and full day. I am exhausted. And yes, teaching can be exhausting. Many of you might agree. It is especially at a school where most of my students live in poverty and experience homelessness, abuse, foster care, single-parent households, domestic violence, hunger. The list goes on and on. Most of my students come in way behind academically and in their non-cognitive skills than their middle class peers because of their lack of opportunities. Some days their neediness strains me. But today I am currently exhausted because of everything outside of my classroom that affects my ability to give my students the education they deserve, an education like the richest in this country by their children. My class size has grown over the years from having 24 kindergartners to 32. This year with the kindergarten numbers being too large in our school, we had to readjust. I ended up saying goodbye to my classroom of students and they moved to another teacher, and I got a whole new group of kids 2 weeks ago. And we started the school year again. And people, they tell me kids adjust, they'll be okay. New classmates, new teacher, sure, why not do the whole transition to kindergarten all over again? The students who walk through my classroom door have experienced more stress and trauma than any 5-year-old should ever have to. And we add to it by shifting around their teachers because of budget and the inability to hire another teacher. One little girl from my class has already moved to another school. She will have had 3 kindergarten teachers in the first 2 months of her education. I am deeply troubled. And when we are in a time that stuffing more and more children into classrooms is considered a norm, all this to say throughout this school year, my students will be assessed. They will be considered intensive in their reading and math skills. I will be labeled a bad teacher at a failing school. I am frustrated by the ways principals and districts attempt to solve problems and in turn uproot students and teachers. I am pissed off that our governor in this state appointed Oregon Education Investment Board is recommending spending $50 million on a statewide data longitudinal system, and students in Beaverton, Oregon sit in class sizes of 40 to 60 students. I am dissatisfied by the union's lack of vocal resistance against the corporate education reform in order to stay part of the conversation instead of standing up and creating the conversation. Oh, and I am sick of the bad teacher hype. To be honest, I'm pretty sick of it. I can't just shut my door and try my best to teach. I can't do it. I don't know how to just stand by and watch the deterioration of public education. And I have a great quote from Jesse's book, Education and Capitalism, and his chapter and about social justice, unionism, and I would read it, but I'm worried about time, so I'll move on. If I have time at the end, I'll read the quote. But I believe in the power of solidarity. I have seen how the union can stand up and fight back to win fair working conditions for teachers and in turn better learning conditions for students. I first turned to my union and became interested in participating as a rep when I was RIFT after my 3rd year of teaching. I was recalled to the district and jumped at the chance to be a building rep. The following year I joined the exec council of my union. At the same time, we were in a difficult bargain year for a new contract. It was unreal going to bargaining sessions and listening to a lawyer talk about teachers in such a disrespectful manner, referencing Rolex watches. I don't know what teacher has a Rolex watch, but to him, some teachers own Rolex watches, yeah. Yeah. I'm pretty sure he showed his watch. Around the time my local union president asked me if I would co-chair an external organizing team, as it looked like our bargain wouldn't be settled anytime soon and we needed some organizing to happen. And I knew we needed that, so I said, sure, why not? School board members tuned out teachers' pleas to settle a fair contract. Instead, one trashed our union on the radio, calling us red shirts, and questioned how we would react if our students chanted like we did at school board meetings in our class. Hostility continued, and we didn't think this would end pretty. 2 other local unions close to ours also felt as though they were being pushed towards a strike. For us, both of those unions voted to strike. Gresham Barlow educators ended up striking for a day, and Park Rose teachers settled the night before their strike date. Reynolds Education Association voted to strike in May, and strike we did. Ain't no picket like an REA picket, because an REA picket don't quit. For a week, we stood in the rain and said to our bargaining team, don't back down. We lived solidarity. One of my favorite moments during the strike was when a retired union organizer helping us said to me, this is a strong strike. You guys are one of the strongest I've ever seen. And I said, well, I'm glad I picked a strong strike to be a part of. We reached out, we got support from communities, other unions, students, and community, and we knew why we were walking the line. In order to transform the teachers' unions, we need teachers to stand up and fight back. We can't just sit back and think the pendulum will swing the other way again, and we can go back to shutting our doors to just teach. We need to collectively take back the pendulum. I didn't become a teacher to become an organizer. I didn't do it. But suddenly I found myself in a role needing to be filled. High-stakes testing will not go away. Not when Oregon spends $9 million per year. That's not including district costs. Profit must be made. We have to stand up and demand for an end to high-stakes testing. Our rank and file members must realize it won't get better for our students, for our profession, unless we demand it. To transform the teachers' union, we need the locals to have strong organizing teams to encourage and recruit members to step up. The teachers' union needs to listen to parents and fight alongside them when they stand up to districts for what is best for their kids. The teachers' union needs to reach out to our fellow union brothers and sisters and join the fight against austerity, not just watch our own backs. The collective power we have as a union is what makes us able to create the change we want for our schools. We need to align ourselves with other groups that fight corporate education reform. Here in Oregon, we have many groups working separately. We have more power when we fight alongside each other. They are telling us that the money isn't there to fund our schools. That is a lie. The money is there. They are giving themselves a whole lot of cash to tell us they won't fund a quality education. They expect teachers and students to do more with less. Oregon will spend $117 million over the next 2 years to implement the strings of the NCLB waiver. We could add back 1,800 more teachers, counselors, and librarians to our school with that money. As a rank and file teacher, and as all of rank and file teachers, we need to demand our union to take up such fights. Groups like social equality educators allow for rank and file teachers to help move their union to fight against the social injustice that plagues our schools and the corporate education reform that wants to profit off of our students. Oregon Save Our Schools formed with a lot of disenchanted Stand for Children members who walked away when they saw that the nonprofit was more interested in signing up members and pushing bad education legislation rather than actually standing up for children. I am thankful for Portland C chapter and the Oregon Save Our Schools. Neither one of them existed in Portland a year and a half ago, but our unions did. And somehow, we let Oregon public education get taken over by our governor and his staff he appointed. He hired a CEO, and their plan to fund our schools doesn't have any of the money actually coming to our schools. The story is not new. The same thing has happened all over the country. In Wisconsin, in Chicago, it's all over the place. Privatization and profits are the priority. The business model used on education is the method, and students are not the priority. Where was our union? The union should have stood up. Our members need to wake up and put the pressure on the union to defend the public schools. I guess I have time for the quote, so I will read it. Jesse, lovely words. You can't fix schools without fixing the society in which they exist. That is because a student whose home is foreclosed on will not be able to do their economics homework. A student whose loved one has been killed in the war in the Middle East will have difficulty connecting with the science teacher's attempt to bring alive the learning of the human body. A student whose parents have been deported will have difficulty crossing the barrier of the parent's signature needed for a field trip to the Civil Rights Museum. A student with parents who have been laid off may see their dream of going to college deferred for lack of funds. A student whose family lacks affordable health insurance may find themselves chronically absent from health class. A student of color who has been warehoused in a prison will miss the lesson on Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from a Birmingham jail. It is time we demand our rights. The same power of working people to protest, strike, and create change exists in the United States. There is a vast potential for teachers who are facing mass layoffs around the United States to organize a struggle that unites broader social forces to demand an end to the practice of spending more to bomb children in the Middle East than to educate them at home. For this to succeed, educators will need to remake their unions. Based on the principles of social justice that connect the fight for education with a broader labor movement and social movement, striving to confront the intertwined evils of war, racism, and exploitation. Thank you, Justin.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you. It's inspiring to hear the stories from various people. I'll pick up from where I left off this morning, plus assuming that not everybody heard it, I will mention a few things. I'm president of the Milwaukee Teachers Education Association, which is an NEA local. We represent 7,000 members. We have 4 units. We have 5,200 teachers, 1,500 ESPs or EAs, educational assistants, 400 substitute teachers, and 15 accountants and bookkeepers. The district's has 80,000 kids, but as we've lost, basically the public schools only have 65% of the market share of the kids in Milwaukee. It's Milwaukee. I mentioned the voucher program this morning, but there's also, Milwaukee also has the noted distinction. It was the first city government in the country to charter schools. The university also has the right to charter schools, and these are obviously non-union schools, and money also comes out of the funding is complicated, but basically we lose, the public schools lose money from there too. The district also charters union schools and non-union schools. So it's very, very much of a mess. Bottom line though is the forces of privatization continue to really push us, and we'll come back to that in terms of tactics. We, as a union, I had nothing to do with it, but withdrew from the NEA in 1973. Not because we were on the left, but because we were on the right. There was a call for a general strike in Wisconsin by the WEAC leadership during a strike of 120 teachers in a small rural area called Hortonville. And the big urbans decided, nah, let's not do that, because they're never going to fill scabs up in our big urbans. But because of that, there was a lot of dissension between the urbans and the rest, and we became reactionary. I say independently reactionary for 21 years. We finally rejoined the NEA in '94. In the process for our, it was complicated, but what happened then is the local staff became, we became a very staff-centric union. When a good friend of mine became union president in 1980, 84 or something like that, it took him 6 months just to get a key to the office. So it was not a member-driven organization. So that's one thing. Now in the state, after the threat of strikes, and the Milwaukee teachers went on strike in the early 70s, the state ruled that strikes would be illegal, the state legislation, but in place of it was binding arbitration, which actually worked a lot to the benefit of unions, because we're very good at explaining to the arbitrators why our point of view is better than the district's, and we cleaned up in a lot of ways. Unfortunately, under the new legislation by Governor Walker, not only he banned our collective bargaining rights, he banned our right to collect dues from public employees without them having to voluntarily assert that they want to be members. He also banned binding arbitration, and of course strikes remain illegal. So we're really hamstrung in certain ways. So that's sort of the background in terms of Milwaukee. In terms of our union, for many years, we at Rethinking Schools and activists in our union have argued that there should be a different approach to teacher unions. It shouldn't just be the service model that you suggested, or exclusive focus industrial bread and butter issues. We say in our vision of social justice unionism has to stand on 3 legs. There has to be a commitment to bread and butter issues. The second leg of the tripod is professional. We have to take up professional issues. And the third leg is we have to take up social justice community issues. That if we leave any one of those out, we're not going to be a strong union. And we see the consequences now. For the last 30 years in Wisconsin, we've taught our members that the only thing we really do are contract enforcement, contract negotiation. Now we can't do it anymore. It's like I'm going to be asking my members, our dues are $1,064 a year. Would you please pay $1,064 a year for what? Well, everything I understand you haven't done in the past, you can't do anymore. So needless, AFT's membership fell from 17,000 to 5,000. WEAC's membership is by 30%. ASME has been decimated. This is exactly what what Walker wanted, what the right-wing Republicans want everywhere, what the international 1% want, is to decimate the public sector unions, because despite our problems with them, In terms of national leadership and other things, they are a force that pushes for progressive legislation and progressive candidates for the most part. There's very few other people out there. You know, it's public sector unions and SEIU, which, okay. So my perspective is that we have to look at teachers unions in the broader concept of public sector unions and the broader concept of trade unions. Trade unions historically have had a dual role. They certainly have protected the people that they represent, but they've also excluded other people. The first strike in Milwaukee was a strike by typographical workers at Milwaukee Sentinel, and the strike was against women joining them. As late as 1931, 14 national unions prohibited African Americans from membership. You know, so, and the NEA had a segregated local up to 1974. So that's one issue, that we have to not have a narrow trade union vote, we have to have a class-wide perspective. Our unions have to represent and advocate for the interests of the entire working class, defined broadly, including people who have been unemployed for 20 years, you know? And so that's one perspective. The other thing, we have to put the issue of race on the table, especially in urban centers. You know, Milwaukee has a sorry history of race, not only in the whole city, but also for our union. For a long time, the only alliance that we made was with the police and firefighters to fight against residency. Now, we're the only big city union city that has a residency requirement. If you work for the Milwaukee Public Schools, you live in the city. Now, no public sector union supports that. Let me say, you know, you should have the right to live anywhere. In the community, when that's the only thing you're fighting for, I don't want to live in the communities where I'm teaching. It really doesn't build credibility amongst the masses of poor people. Similarly, we have enforced the contract to such extent. I'll give you just one example. It was in the mid-1990s. The African American community pushed to set up 2 African American centric schools, a middle school. And so there's a question about how to staff them. According to the results, the debris of the court desegregation suit that was settled out of court, there were some guidelines as to the percentage of African Americans staff that had to be in certain schools. The community wanted 1/3. Our contract read 28%. And we fought the community. I had nothing to do with it. Fought them, and we won. Yay! And so what it meant was, instead of African American teachers, a couple going into the school, well, actually no white teachers had wanted to go into school, so they had to hire new white teachers and put them in the school.
What crazy.
It was really a disgrace. So we've been working for years in terms of changing things. I got elected 1.5 years ago. We started a campaign to reimagine the MTA, and besides the 3 legs of unionism that I've talked about, and I have a little card out, people can see it. Our slogans are move from collective bargaining to collective action, because we've lost collective bargaining. We'd love to have it back, don't get me wrong. To reclaim our classrooms and reclaim our profession, build collaborative public schools that serve all students, work with parents and community, promote democracy and justice, and improve our union's internal communication, public relations, and our capacity to organize and mobilize our members. We have to move the locus of activity down to the school-based, school level. And that's hard, because for years we've trained people. If you have a call, if you have a problem, call them. One of the first calls I got after I became president is a BR, building representative from a high school, called me up and said, Bob, I said, what's going on? He said, the kids are running wild on the 3rd floor here it was in Madison High School in Milwaukee. I said, have you called the principal? And he called me. I mean, I really couldn't solve his problem, you know, but it was like this dependency. It's a codependency, because it really helped our staff. I'll just end by saying, and I'd like to have a conversation with Jesse, your quotation from the Seattle, in the Seattle newspaper of your president. I understand your frustration with that, especially during a bargaining period. I'll say this, though, that I think given we have to figure out how to work with Democratic elected school boards and with administrators in a grand alliance to defend public schools. Now, that doesn't mean we just give in to them, but we have to theoretically, we have to unite the many to defeat the few. And the many include Democratic elected school boards and principals that are not little Mussolinis, and so on and so forth, because the powers of privatization in Milwaukee, if we go at each other's throats, the administration and the union, they love it. See how dysfunctional the public schools are? We need more private schools. And so it's a fine line that we have to walk. So, thank you. Oh, I
Okay, so before we just open it up for discussion, what I'd like you to do is turn to a partner, hopefully someone you haven't met yet, and just talk for a few minutes about what on this panel resonated with you. What sticks with your experience or you're still thinking about after listening?
So do you have a system?
It's been year after year that they tell me there's been a that doesn't create like this bigger gap now. Start their education.
And then you have to do a lot of testing too.
Well, there's a lot of assessment, not as much as other places. I think that the thing is that my fear and what's happening in Oregon and this new Oregon, Oregon Investment Education Board acknowledges because they are pushing for assessment more longitudinal to have that level status. It's pretty, they want to make sure kids are kinder ready so that their assessments are kindergarten. In a way that's not beneficial to the teacher actually providing them short about, you know what I mean? And we don't have as much pressure as other places, I think. We're testing them, but it's being our thing is it's really amazing to see how much corporate education is here under like our dysfunction at first. And it's like you have all these examples of places where this is already happening. Like you're just watching it happen right in front of you.
And they claim all we do is research-based research and research.
And also we all focus so much on the academic aspect of research-based or whatever, when there's so many more non-cost schools that we should be teaching children that they need, like self-regulation, like discover critical thinking that they do that we're not allowed to teach because we're so focused on this academic aspect that's not testing
We did the early childhood teachers in Milwaukee. We have full day K-4 and full day K-5, and they're going nuts. So what we did is we got a school board member who happens to be editor of Everything Schools to introduce a resolution calling for a joint union district task force on development of appropriate practices for kindergarten through second grade. And we had teachers testify, and parents, and the administration is very interested in that. We're showing, basically as an air of brutal laundry from the top. It's like, well, sorry, we can't fix this. So I agree with Jesse that you can't just be silent on this thing. But now we have this task force, which is really, I think for the first time, we're going to not just have guidelines, but policies on early childhood. And one of these is we're going to address is classes. I think we're going to push any K-4 teacher with 20 or more needs, half-time para, and 25 or more for full-time para in the classroom. It's just absurd.
It's crazy. You're just babysitting and you're just putting out fires the whole time because they're young children and you're not able to actually delve into the deepest of actually learning needs, which is what they need. And we just stereotype this. I don't think it's as prevalent as it could be. And I think it needs to be more. It's kind of a little bit behind the scenes of like deciding to do this, create things, but I would love to see parents being present in conversation.
I love being in a room of teachers. Okay. So now's your chance. The way I'd like to run this is you guys have just listened to a lot from the panelists. So I'm going to give them a break. And they'll be able to come back at the end, but it's not going to just be kind of a question and answer session. So if you guys, if you can raise questions if you want to, please do. But there's a lot of expertise in this room, so all other people should feel free to try and answer those questions beyond the panelists, and then we'll give you guys a chance at the end to come back in. So if you want to speak, if you want to share with the group, just raise your hand. If you want to raise a question, I'd ask that you raise a fist so I could kind of prioritize questions. And I guess we'll get started. All right, back there.
Yeah, hi. I'm a teacher in Beaverton School District now, but I moved here from Chicago 7 years ago, and was in the Chicago Teachers Union when Renaissance 2010 happened and the militarization. And it was important then, and it's important now to recognize, as you said, that that was racist. And continues to be. I'm thinking with the current attacks and demonization of teachers, what's going on is also sexist. And I think it's important to name that. I think that teachers, you know, sort of like the welfare queens were the demonizing personification of a lot of things the right wing hated. And now it's teachers that are representing the nanny state, I think, and vilified in that way. And it's sexist. And so my question is just generally, you know, if we can name that, and then how do we fight it?
Great question. And if you have something that comes to your mind while someone else is speaking, you can just raise your hand and make eye contact with me. If I nod my head, I've got you, and I'll start a stack. Okay, so in the back there.
Well, to address that, I think that the people who call it the new misogyny are very, very correct. And I see over and over again, it's happened to me as somebody with a little bit of snow on top who's a little unorthodox. And I've been targeted.
Yeah.
And I fought it and won. And now I try to help people when I can fight it. It's older female teachers and male teachers. But face it, women over 40 are the majority of teachers, period. So if we're being villainized, it's sexist and it's ageist.
Yeah.
And what do they do? What do the administrators who have drunk the Kool-Aid do? They evaluate you, and they'll come and do the surprise sit-downs in your class, and they'll use business speak. You're not coming up, not quite up to par, and they will harass you and harangue you. Finally, the NEA Today magazine came up with an article on teacher bullying. They said that it's just widespread right now. Well, of course it is.
Yeah.
It's age discrimination, and it is against the law. How are you supposed to become a better teacher if you're harangued and have to spend an extra 10 hours a week doing these lesson plans that haven't been bargained by the union, but any administrator can add anything to them and keep red penciling them for you? How are you supposed to really be getting better for your kids if you're being crushed under somebody's heel?
Great. So I've got in the green in the back, and I just want to say one thing I forgot is this is a large room, and I would like to get as many voices in as possible. So I'm just going to limit people to 2 minutes, and when you're at a minute 30 seconds, I'll just say 30 seconds, or please wrap up, something like that. And feel free again to raise your hand while others are speaking.
Me now?
Yeah.
Metaphors shape how we think, and I guess I'm interested in the question of changing the way we talk about teaching, viewing ourselves as teacher practitioners, like medical practitioners or lawyer practitioners. And I'm wondering if anyone can talk about the difference between the guilds and associations of lawyers and doctors and the relationship that you guys have been talking about with unions. If you're a profession and it's a practice, and we get better as we do it longer, and how that might impact the way our union would be in the future.
Okay, so my name is Beth, and I am a teacher in the Beaverton School District. And we laid off 200 teachers and moved 350 this past year. And I'm just wondering, for me, I was really frustrated with my union because I felt like my union was not able to fight for me, and I felt like their goal should have been to fight against the district, but instead I felt like they just like approved everything that the district did. And I don't know how to get my union to kind of shift. And I know that's kind of like the goal of this, so I was hoping for maybe some like, how do we do that?
Yeah.
Great question. In the front, let's see, yeah.
A question for Gwen, and I guess it fits into the previous question too, but I'd like to hear your take on the proposed restructuring and changes within the OEA. Are you hopeful about it? Is it impacting your local at this time? And I'd be interested in hearing what other people say.
I've got in the back. Yeah.
Oh, I'm Doug Edelstein from Nathan Hale High School in Seattle. And I want to comment on Mr. Peterson's idea of the fine line we must tread in this Grand Alliance. I see the Grand Alliance to be three groups: teachers, their union, and the parents.
Yeah.
And that's a bright line. I cannot imagine that the parents of this country see their children's future through standardized testing, privatization, corporatization, and the widgetizing of their kids. So, so long as we represent ourselves truly, what is best in the best interest of students and the best interest of public education, we cannot fail to represent and ally ourselves with parents. So for me, to hell with fine lines. There's a very bright line there. There is no fine line. If we draw a bright line for the welfare of the students of these constituencies, it'll be very clear. It'll be a bright line.
Got in the front here, and then Bruce in the back.
So my name is Noah. I work in Seattle as well. There are many of us here. I think something that I think is important to think about, besides that we are professionals, we should be referring to ourselves as professionals in everything we do, talking to our students, our parents, and when we testify at school boards and write op-eds to the newspapers, which I hope many of us do and continue to do. But we should also, I think it's not a really healthy practice to be thinking of the union as the other. And I've heard people do that many points even this session today, because everyone who's here that's a member of the union is a member of the union, and they are the union. The union is that group. The people in Chicago that form CORE are showing that because they are the rank and file. We're the rank and file here. So if we're complaining about what the union doesn't do, we should shift that speech a little bit and think about what are we doing to help organize the union. Everyone in my union, regardless of their failings, and I agree with most of Jesse's criticisms, Jonathan's not as good at it, but a lot of them are very open to hearing your suggestions. Whether or not they listen to you is one thing, but the more people that do it, the more they actually listen. And there are actually leaders here in this classroom. Mary and Dan are both on our board in Seattle, and there's a lot of people, including myself, that are leaders. So I'd like for everyone here to think of themselves not as the union is the other thing. We are the union. We are the leaders here.
Okay, so Bruce, and then right in front of Bruce.
About internal morale, that polls, when the public is polled about what they feel about their teachers, the level of teachers is very high. That's why you see teachers, firefighters, and nurses used on television over and over again. I would suggest not being confused by a small number of people with a lot of money who own the media channels, and take that for where the general public is at and where our potential strengths are. We have examples of Wisconsin and Chicago, the Reynolds strike that happened here in Oregon, where the public and the community, by outreach and by instinct, came to support their teachers and to portray it. One way to view the situation is not to help the community realize that we are fighting over a diminishing set of crumbs, and we're attacking each other laterally. It's not necessary. We need to direct our energy upward to the top 1% to 2% and demand social and economic justice, and that could bring a lot of power to all of us and help turn things around.
Great. So right in front.
Over here?
Yeah,
Yeah, I
you.
think the point is already
And then
made.
just real quick, sorry, while you're speaking, I've gotten a huge list now, so I'm gonna have to take a last round of hands.
Oh,
when-
my point was eloquently made, so we can move on.
Okay, so how about right in front of him? Yeah, you.
Okay. Gwen, I really like your idea about taking Chicago's model of the 70-page document. I haven't read it, but I'm just wondering how can we start that here? Can we, like, do we hold community meetings or how do we get that?
Great question. So I've got
I'm
you,
interested
but
in how we-
sorry, the gentleman in the front here. I've got you soon.
The woman before had mentioned something about schools teachers being 40-plus-year-old women, and as a 40-plus-year-old guy, I want to know what we're doing for, I know a lot of student teachers in school today, and students who are coming from teachers. What are we doing for the younger people who are raised in a, in a time where unions are being bashed, teachers are being bashed, they're going through teacher programs where they're advised never to speak up and join unions. And I've got a couple of younger teachers in my building who don't even want to hear about the union.
Yeah.
What are we doing to bring them on board? Because if they're gone, then the unions are gone.
Question. So get the
Well, Richard mentioned part of this, but I'm curious how we can recast the image of unions generally. A lot of the people I talk to, including the younger teachers, have a generally negative cast on what unions do and why they should be union members. They see it as primarily an adversarial and negative, defensive sort of thing. And I'm wondering, I was just putting it out there, how can we do things that are positive? I like what you said about professionalism. Maybe we have to seize, some aspect of the guild, some way to make a statement about our professional standards and what we really stand for. I also really think we have to do something to demonstrate solidarity, so the sheer numbers of us and our impact are emphasized. I don't know. Throwing it out.
Next to Bruce in the back, yeah.
Well, along those lines, I would not advocate going on strike in a way to build that positive impact, but I'm in Reynolds also, and as we were approaching our strike, I was very anxious. It's like everything in the media is so negative against teachers, so negative, and I really felt we're going to be out there on our own. And the positive feedback that we had from our parents, from the community, was phenomenal. And so, what Bruce said, don't believe what you read in the papers. The vast majority of people do believe in the teachers and do believe that we have a right to do that. And I've said numerous times that our strike was the most amazing, horrible experience I'd ever been through. Because it was horrible. It was 5 days on the picket line, 4 days in torrential rain. And the parents were coming out, their kids were making us things, and they were all telling us, stay out as long as you have to. We are behind you. But if you just read the papers, then it's like everybody hates teachers. Everybody hates teachers. And they didn't. And so don't go on strike just to get that good feeling, but do believe in teachers, and we need to believe in that rather than believe in what we read on the paper.
I've got the gentleman in the amazingly awesome shirt right there, and then yeah.
My name is Matt. I'm a teacher in South Seattle at a public school, and I work as a quality indicator. Just to feedback a little bit of what I'm wrong with saying there is, and I've fallen into this myself. I'm speaking mostly to myself on this, when I'm angry at the union. And he's right, for the union, I might say union leadership and staff. The way I kind of organized my mind is union leadership and staff went away. We're still here. We just replaced those 10, 15 positions from amongst our ranks. If the union went away, that's all of us. And so, just to really shift that in my mind, and keep in mind that if we're unhappy with the leadership, we know we have discussions, we have elections, but just to remember that, because I used to say that a lot, maybe our union is doing, and I've got to shift that. Our union leadership maybe isn't seeing the big picture, is doing, but again, this is what almost like we are the union.
Okay, so I've got Hyun and then.
In talking about fighting over this kind of lateral, fighting over the problems right now that's happening with the state that our economy's in, I think for us to be a social justice union, if we are on the front lines of advocating for things like single-payer healthcare, so all our students or families have healthcare, and also we save money for the state fiscally on double-digit increases for healthcare year after year while we're cutting out of the classroom, I think that will gain a broader support for the union. Also for things like moving our enormous amount of money in pensions, as that this is being attacked all over the country, and starting a state public bank. And things like this, I mean, if you look at polls, single-payer healthcare is really popular among the people. People hate Wall Street banks right now. And these are opportunities for us right now to organize for broader public good and to fight against austerity. And for folks in Portland, I'd like to pass this around. November 3rd, we are organizing and mobilizing against austerity. And for broader issues, not just for us in education, we shouldn't have to cut from healthcare and social services to fund education. We also need to worry about students that have out-of-control student debt and demand that there is money in this country and that we fix things for all of us and not fight each other for the crumbs. So if you're in Portland, please take one of these and show up on November 3rd.
I've got Dan and then the woman in the front. And I just have to say, if I've got a few more people on the stack. We're going to finish out for those who have raised their hands, but I'm sorry if you raise your hands later than this. I can't get you on. Sorry.
My name is Dan. Teacher Tail. I went out to Chicago for the teacher strike to help out because I'm a sub and I've got a lot of work in the beginning of the year, so I thought I'd put my time to good use. And I want to start by saying, Emily, give yourself a little credit. In your speech, I think we just found the next copy for our newsletter. You can see, so we're going to run that. We're okay with that. But I want to talk about strikes and what I saw in Chicago, because I think that, I guess putting it in a way, strikes are, in my opinion, the most important experiential learning experience that we can ever have.
Yeah.
In a strike, you learn, you break down barriers between people, racist, sexist barriers, and more importantly, I think you build up confidence and ability to lead yourself, whether it's in your school or in your workplace if you're not a teacher. And I think these are really, really crucial. We should, as Gwen, Evelyn, right? Sorry, Gwen. I have those names mixed in my head, sorry. Gwen said we should organize. We need to organize to improve our lives and the lives of our students. Well, you should organize and be in the strike if you can, or whatever, organize your union, because that will improve your teaching and your instruction too. I think that, it helps you see things a lot differently. And when I was out there, I can tell you that, and that's a huge union. It's a local of what, like 30,000 people? And every single person I met is a change teacher forever. Like, they are going to go back, even after their struggle, and they are going to bring that sense of confidence and ability to change things and fight every single other thing that Ron is going to try to shove down their throat. And everyone in the city of Chicago knows that. So even though, like people said, the majority of teachers are the majority of teachers are women, right? 80% still. In CTU, it's 87%. And now everyone in Chicago are going to look to those people, those women, and know that they are leaders in their community, in their school. They're the people who are the leaders of the labor movement in Chicago. That's right. I think that CTU messaging is really important. They were pro-union. They waged a class struggle that identified the 1% as the problem. They were anti-racist. They said that the Renaissance 2010 is a racist policy and that we need to fight this. And they reached out to communities of color. And I think that they waged most importantly, I'll close on this, they waged a struggle to win concrete gains. They weren't just waging an ideological struggle. They wanted to win something for their membership and for the students. And that's the kind of thing that we can show the rest of the people in the cities that we live in. That's how you fight and that's how you win.
Right in front and then right next to you.
I teach in Eugene, I live in Eugene, and it's really exciting to be in this school today with a group of people who are so committed and so involved and active. However, when we go back to our own schools, that's not always the case. When I go back to my school and I talk, I'm the union rep in the building, when I talk to the people who were in my school and I talked about the strike in Chicago, and I talked about the strikes that happened in Oregon at the end of the year, last year, and hear well-educated, well-meaning, good people say, they shouldn't have walked out, they shouldn't strike. We're notoriously rotten consumers as teachers. We don't put ourselves out there. We don't have letters to the editor about who we are. We don't have columns about who we are as teachers. We let other people define us. The people that are in the media are defining us. The people who are you know, the Walmart folks who are putting out these movies are trying to define us. And sadly, there are enough of us, as well as the community in general, who are buying some of that crap. And we need to be stronger. We need to get up more and talk about who we are, why we're there, what we're doing for the next generation, why it's important that we have that top 1% has for their children, why that's what we're trying to bring, and why the testing is wrong, why the classrooms with 35, 40 kids are wrong, why the elementary size classrooms of 30 kids, how can you possibly teach them basic skills? We're not teaching to that, we're teaching to, so that we have little automatons who know how to do whatever role it is where our society is setting out for them. My concern is how we become better consumers as teachers, how we make ourselves become more aware, and then teach the community about who we really are and why we're really there.
Exactly 2 minutes. Great job.
It's really, I want to respond to people who are saying that we are in the union. So being in the union, it's really hard. Like when you have friends who can't be here today because they have their AP class has 60 kids in it, and they would really like to be here today, but they're so beaten down. And so many of our colleagues just feel smashed. So how do we get them? Like I think we're having a really hard time doing like we can bring people in and talk to people because people are so exhausted. I almost did this because I was in Park Road last year, and even just the discussion of unions leaves me feeling exhausted. How do we get not just ourselves but our colleagues have that sense of energy to do it?
Very much. Last speaker.
Well, I think I'll start by trying to answer your question as best as I can, which might not be that well. But like, start small. Like, don't look at the. I mean, we need to have like a perspective of where we need to go, but also know what we can do as an individual. Which I think for teachers in the room means join C. Like, I think that's something that people should be thinking about. Like, that's a small thing. It gets you involved, and it's a welcoming place to get involved. I know in my union, I had to fight just to find out when meetings are, yet alone to like actually be a leader in the union. So, and that brings up the question about like this next generation of workers in the schools. Like, how do we get these people involved in the union that don't see the point, that maybe they've come through Teach for America and like they have a completely different perspective. And I think ultimately we have to do what CTU has done, what Reynolds has done. Like, we have to show people that the unions are how we're going to fight and save our jobs and actually be able to do the things we were hired to do, which is teach our children and help our kids. And then the last thing I was going to say is I think we really need to learn the lessons from CTU, from Reynolds, and even how did teachers' unions arise? Like, how did we get to where we're at now? Because we shouldn't kid ourselves. Like, I guarantee you that the school board members in Reynolds are looking back saying, how did we lose this strike? And what do we need to do next time so that we don't lose again? So as we think about this, like, we need to learn our own lessons because the boss is doing it too. And if we're going to be able to beat them in the future, it's going to take us figuring those questions out.
Great, thanks. All right. So real quick before I hand it back to the panelists, I just want to put my own 2 cents in, because I really speak to that question. You know, I thought that was a really phenomenal question at the end that I think is worth thinking about, because I've been trying to deal with that as someone this year who's in a brand new school and is teaching new courses, and was very, been totally overwhelmed the last couple of months, and feel like I have very little time to be active in the way that I was even in my limited role before. One thing that PAT is doing right now that I think is incredibly important and should be done even more frequently, not just as we're coming up to bargaining, but as a listening campaign where you just meet with one other member in your school and talk to them about what brings them joy in their profession and what sucks their energy away. And it could be a few people, it could be multiple people, but what I think really should happen, we're doing this, maybe a few people at a school, or maybe 1, 2 people are doing it at a school with 2 or 3 other people. I think we need to get whole committees really to like listen to everyone at the schools. And I have to say, I hope me sharing this, but one of the things I learned when listening to Nancy, the librarian of the place that we're sitting in here, is that she built this place basically with a $0 budget in the library. If you look around today, you would never know that. And I certainly didn't know that as a first-year teacher at Madison. And that is something that I now want to struggle over, that I want to fight around, that I mean, this is an incredible library, and the fact that she spends most of her time as a trained professional writing grants to continue to fund this rather than actually doing her job, I think is outrageous. It's, doing her job too, but, having to do all that together, I mean, that's outrageous. We should fund our libraries. They're incredibly important parts of our community and our school. And so, I think it's the first thing I think that we have to get members to do is organize in their own school and talk to each other and take the time. And that time, I guarantee you, it's so much more fulfilling, I think, than sitting at a rep meeting. I love sitting at a rep meeting, but I had such a more fulfilling time actually talking to my colleagues about what's going on in the school. And I think that's something, if the first thing you approach someone is like get involved with the union or be a rep, it's not necessarily, it's not going to speak to them, especially given where unions are at right now, right? But if you get a crew together that wants to listen to your fellow teachers and hear what is going on in the school and together advocate for each other, that's a much more attractive way of looking at it. So I'm going to throw it back to the panelists. I'm thinking maybe we'll go in opposite order this time. And so, Bob, you want to start us off?
Okay, I'm going to just talk about a few things. First of all, I just want to mention a few resources. I recommend books by Bill Fletcher, They're Bankrupting Us, and 20 Other Myths About Union. Also, he has a book called Solidarity Divided, The Crisis of Organized Labor, really solid. Labor Notes, I'm sure many of you know that, but it's a great venue to more information. Also, Dollars and Cents out of Boston, and Rethinking Schools. And this book, Transforming Teacher Unions, which I co-edited with Michael Charney from the FT, it's on sale for $10. It has a summary of social justice unionism from a conclave of NEA and AFT folks who met in Portland, Oregon in 1994 and issued a call for social justice unionism, and also some history on the Chicago and New York Teachers Union. It's available either from New York or the Rethinking Schools booth. I did also, I wanted to mention 2 other things. In terms of new teachers, we have to have a very conscientious and thought out plan to educate them about the history of unionism, both teacher unionism and unionism and class struggle generally. I agree with that. We also have to note, I think a lot of new teachers are most concerned with their profession. They want to do a good job, and we as unions have to speak to that. And so what that has meant for us is, as I mentioned in my speech, we started a teaching and learning center at our union. We put out a Reimagine, a teaching and learning newsletter. We're doing that monthly, focused on professional issues and how collective action on our part can help promote collective good professional issues. There's copies over at the table if you'd like. And the last thing I'll just say that part of doing professional work is also pushing teachers to teach about social justice. Because I've always learned, if you want to know something, then you should teach about it. You learn it real quick. Unless you're a really shitty teacher. We did an interview with Howard Zinn in the book TTU, and one of the things he says, it's essential that we not only be teacher unionists, but teachers of unionism. And that's something that we should push our members as well, push and also provide resources and so on, because once you start teaching it, people will learn about it. Thank you.
So, wow, there was a lot that was brought up. It made me think about a lot of different things. But how do you get our union to shift? I think that you have to take part in the union. As Noam was saying, we are the union, and we really have to, as rank and file teachers, come together and form where our union is going. That's the beauty of a union, is the solidarity and the work of the members is where we can direct our union. And so I really encourage people to sign up for Social Equality Educators. Dan is passing around a clipboard that is, you can check if you're in Seattle or Portland. I know in Portland we're a small group and we're still like, we just started and we're just forming, but we start with baby steps and we build from there. And it's really about coming together and allowing ourselves to push back against the union bureaucracy, because I agree, we are the union, and I wasn't trying to say that I wasn't a part of the union. I have lots of critiques about the union, and I have a huge amount of respect for the union. My father was a union carpenter, and I grew up with just this sense of union. It's one thing my father believes in more than anything else is the union. So just right there, I think that we need to realize, yes, we are a part of the union, and what are positive things we can do to shift that conversation. I also want to say that the Oregon School Board Association has a workshop about our 5-day Reynolds strike, that they're going to be informing other school board members on how to deal with a 5-day strike. Instead of how to settle before going to a strike, they're going to talk about the great things they did as a school board to deal with a 5-day strike. So I want to say that the fight against teachers' unions has not ended. They're educating other school boards on how to deal with a strike. Wake up, Seattle. We need to be strong. We need to fight back. So I think that it's important for us to realize that the attacks on unions are going to end up on the picket line, and we need to educate our members that why it's important to walk the picket line. I walked the picket line with people that did not think they would walk a picket line, that never thought that they would be there. But it's important to realize that it might come to that, and to be ready and prepared for that to happen, and to really think about, as a collective group, what the power we have, and that empowers members greatly. And also, there are so many teachers, and I know we're exhausted, I know we're tired, but if every teacher took the time to go to one event a month, one school board meeting, one C meeting, one rep meeting, then we would have teachers at all of these different meetings and we can all participate. And it's just one meeting. If everyone took the time in their schedule once a month, we could do it. There's a lot of teachers.
Thank you for a great discussion, and got me realizing we need to continue these discussions to have better and better answers to a lot of these questions. I think the critical question is, how do we get the unions to shift, to do what they did in Chicago, which was to draw a line and say, when you come after our kids, you're coming after us, right? That's what Karen Lewis said on Labor Day of this year. And we will do whatever is needed to defend our children and our profession, right? How do we get more unions to do that? And what did they win in Chicago? We should just be concrete about what they won. 600 new art teachers and music teachers there, right? I mean, these hiring new teachers in a time when they say there's no money is absolutely a phenomenal victory for not just for teachers getting their jobs back, but actually for enriching education to bring out the things that make it joyful, right? And so these, I think while they didn't win everything, and while there's a lot more to fight for, they said this is the first step in a fight, and you won't be able to run over us anymore. And it was really inspiring. So, but how did they get to that? Well, I want to just take a quick look at the history of the Chicago Teachers Union. It formed in 1937. There used to be like 8 different unions in Chicago. There was a male teachers unions for high school. There was female teachers union for high school, and the same in elementary school. There was all these different unions that were competing against each other, right, in the same district. And there was one teacher who was fed up with that and said the union isn't fighting for us and representing our interests. We're not getting our paychecks. This is in the heart of the Great Depression, and they would miss months of paychecks. And so what did this teacher do? He formed the Volunteer Emergency Committee, which was just basically go around the neighborhoods and get support for teachers getting paid. And then they called a rally downtown, and they went and occupied the banks. Sound good, doesn't it? They went and these teachers took it to the next level. They rioted in the banks, tipped the desks over, put ink all over the walls. You aren't paying your taxes, that's why we're not getting our paychecks, right? What happened? They came up with the money very quickly, right? So this leader, John Fox, actually was able to then use the credibility of the victory of that struggle to draw all the unions together, which formed the CTU. Right? And so I think there's a lesson in that when you fight back, you can bring unity amongst a lot of people when they see what wins, what works, right? And this will put a lot more interest of our colleagues in joining the union, right? The same thing happened with CORE in Chicago, right? When the union wasn't fighting against Renaissance 2010, a group of 8 teachers got together and did a study group on the book The Shock Doctrine by Naomi Klein. And they said, we got to figure out why we're under attack, what's going on here. They led that study group, and once they felt like they really knew what neoliberalism was doing to education, then they said, we got to go out and act on it. And they formed CORE, and they took over the union, but not just replacing the leadership. The reason why they won that strike is they empowered the rank and file. It wasn't just that they had better leaders at the top of the union that were really savvy at negotiating behind closed doors, right? It was that they said they put forward a plan for the union that meant listening to the members, what they needed, and empowering them to come out. And that was really the lesson of the strike that I want to bring to Seattle, because I think we have a long way to go, but I think the fact that we have a group of teachers and the social equality educators that are learning the lessons from CORE, I think we can replicate this in district after district as teachers increasingly are fed up with the attack and being blamed for problems we didn't create.
I can't help it. I want to answer some of the questions as quickly as I can. We started off with this is sexist, and we know it's racist, but it's also sexist what's happening. I was recently at this women's leadership lunch, and it was a really nice and empowering sort of luncheon, but what I sat there in that luncheon, and it made me really think about why teachers' unions. Why are we, we're teachers, for God's sake. Why would they be attacking us? And I realized that we are predominantly, sorry men out there, but we are predominantly a female group. And so it's an easier target than firefighters, than police, that are more male-driven organizations. I think that that's an easy target. So I actually, at this leadership lunch, one of the Senator Kotek, who is a strong advocate, I said, do you realize this? We had this conversation, and it was like, and she gets it, but it was such an interesting way that she was like nodding like, I am getting it, but we'll see what happens there. But you're right, it is sexist. The question about, and I empathize with Beaverton folks thinking how I've been teaching 5, 8 years, 10 years at a high school, and I've been teaching English, and you just placed me teaching math in a 5th grade classroom. That's what I get, and I have 60 students in there. I mean, how is my union fighting for me? Well, through the contract, it is that you have a job. And that's the way that if you look at all of these things, it's like, well, at least you have a job. Mm-hmm. There are unemployed people that would take that job, and that's messed up. Yep. It is really messed up. And I think that part of it is we have been dealing with cuts over and over and over. And I think that we really do need to figure out how we are listening to our members about how we do this in a different way. And that if things were done differently, we could have fought for the funding there to make sure that if I would have known you had a levy out there, we should have gathered to make sure that, you know, if Nike's there, for God's sake, there's money there. We should have been, exactly, they don't. But there's things that we should have done in solidarity together. I've been told I need to wrap up. I'm cutting into someone else's session. But I think, note that we are trying desperately to change the question about structures. There are definitely some things that are problematic, and I think that Portland in our state has known to not always get along with our state affiliate, but we're trying to shape the state affiliate and change the direction as the rank and file members. So it's not over. That's what I can say. But thank you so much, everyone, for coming.